me now is Philip Luther from Amnesty International. He's the charity's director for the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you very much for your time. Some of the details in this report, they are quite shocking, but we've heard some of it before. What makes this report different?
Well, Amnesty International has been documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity by the Syrian government forces and by the group that calls itself the Islamic State for the last 5 years. What we've tried to do here is to shed some light on areas that have come under the control of armed opposition groups in the north of Syria, particularly in the areas in and around Aleppo and Idlib. And these are areas that have been under the control of certain armed groups for now some years, going back to 2012. So armed groups have set up administrative institutions, quasi-judicial institutions. And so really what this report does is offer a rare glimpse into what the life is like, really like, for some who live under that armed group rule. And it's a bleak picture for some who criticize those armed groups who don't conform to the behavior.
Can you give us an idea then of that glimpse of what life can be like living in an area controlled by one of these groups?
Well, the problem that we've really focused on is with respect to journalists, media activists, humanitarian workers, human rights activists, those who dared, on the one hand, to speak out against some of the armed groups and what they perceive to be problematic conduct by the armed groups in the areas that they live in. That on the one hand, and others who have fallen foul of those armed groups' often strict interpretation of Islamic law. So to give you a sense, on the one hand, we've had dozens of abductions of civilians, in some cases simply because they've criticized the armed groups. In other cases, there have been sort of trials in quasi-judicial institutions which have led to people being executed. There's a couple of examples in the report of, for instance, a woman who was executed for adultery, a teenager, a 17-year-old, who was executed simply because he was accused of being homosexual.
Philip, we've heard that some of these groups are getting support from external players. We mentioned the United States and Saudi Arabia, amongst other countries. I mean, what are you calling on their supporters to do? And are you hopeful that there will be a response to this report?
That's correct. These armed groups have powerful backers that include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United States of America, Turkey as well. And what we're calling on them to do, because they have leverage over these groups, they do provide support. That support in some cases quite opaque, the details of it, but it includes financial support, it includes support with equipment. In some cases, it also includes arms transfers. So they've got leverage that they can use to put pressure on these armed groups to stop such war crimes, and we're calling them war crimes in some instances. And we're also calling particularly on Russia and the USA, who are co-leading the negotiations that are being brokered by the UN, although they're stop-start in Geneva, to ensure that abductions and torture by armed groups on the one hand, the massive number of arbitrary detentions and torture by the state on the other, are prioritized as they have not been so far in those peace negotiations.
Okay, Philip, thank you very much for your time this evening.